For the first part of this, I am going to quickly define democracy, quickly define what various different constructions of truth look like in democracy. And while I'm doing that, you can see that there's been this board up all day where they've got various different technologies, various different problems that there might be related to truth. So it's not just misinformation, disinformation, but also tribalism, perception control, all sorts of different other issues around truth and democracy. And also, importantly, the democratic function. And the reason why this exists is to try and get us to think a little bit clearer about exactly which technologies are doing what to what part of democracy. Because I feel that as activists, this is an activist conference, we need to be far more clearer in what our purposes are going to be, because then we can actually create tools that are going to change the world, as opposed to make these general statements. That's just my take on activism. I think you've got to be as specific as possible. And I don't know if you guys have a different take on it, but I haven't seen many general projects work. So do feel free, there is a QR code there. I'd be more than happy if you wanted to come up and take a look whilst I'm doing this presentation. Oh yeah, and if you don't like or do like any of what I'm saying, and you don't have the opportunity to come up and grab me, feel free to email me, and that's also my Twitter handle. I don't know how popular Twitter is here. Is it so-so? I mean, you know. Cool, next slide, please. Democracy. Do you think that most people know what democracy is? Show of hands if you think that the average person in Slovenia understands what democracy is. 1. So. Cool. That's not great, is it? I mean, like, it's definitely true in the UK as well, so I'm not going to judge you guys. I'm going to quickly just go through some basic democratic principles just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I think these are generally, it will be difficult to argue with them, but if you would like to, then please do try. Maybe not on the time of everyone, though. Maybe come and grab me later. So next slide, please. Okay, so in democracy, there's a difference between democratic values and democratic governance systems, and also various different logics that exist between these things. So the democratic value is that rule by the people, or the people are sovereign. And I think that that's what most people think of when they think of democracy. The thing is that this is never going to happen because it's too idealistic. We don't really know what it means to rule. We don't really know what the people are. You know, all these populist movements are there. So what we try and create are governance systems that do as best as they can to adhere to this ideal. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. Next slide. So the current governance system is representative democracy. Democracy first started out as everyone would be able to gather in the same town hall, raise their hand and vote for various different principles. I don't think anyone would want to go back to that because generally women weren't allowed to vote. There was a big slavery system. It wasn't great. Now we have a representative function, or at least most democracies that I know of do, where in some form we elect representatives to negotiate on our behalf. So to have some sort of link to the community that they're representing and go out and negotiate with all the other representatives in the democracy as to what should happen in terms of law, governance, these kind of things. This is a really, really good article by Schmitter and Karl, written in the 90s. Maybe, I don't know, the slides might be distributed and you can just click on that link and go and check it out. But as a democratic scholar, I think it's really helpful to constantly read basic texts in democracy just to remind yourself of what the basic principles are. Next slide, please. Okay, this is possibly one of the aspects of democracy that is least understood, at least that I mean, there's way more aspects of democracy that aren't well understood, but this is probably one of the most important aspects. So a liberal democracy is a conflict between two completely different logics. So on the one hand, we have liberalism, which says that no matter what, I am protected by the rule of law and I have human rights. So even if everyone in this room decided that I should be, I don't know, let's just say killed. Like, let's say you all just decided Alice is really not on, we need to have her removed. I am protected by human rights, so there are limits to what democracy can and cannot do. Yeah? So that's one logic. It's all around protecting the individual, human rights and the rule of law. The second logic is democracy, which I've already kind of gone through. It's ruled by the people in whichever form it takes via elections. And you can see how those two logics can sometimes come into conflict with each other. Yeah? Because occasionally it might be, well, let's take wearing masks, for instance. Wearing masks might be something that democratically everyone would say that you have to wear a mask, whereas other people might think it conflicts with their human rights. And both have a point underneath liberal democracy, but then there's a conflict there, and there's a negotiation as to whether or not you're going to be more democratic or more liberal. And in some countries, there's generally a lean towards one or the other. So I know that in the UK, for instance, we lean towards more the liberalism side of things, whereas in Sweden, it leans more towards the democratic side of things. Does that all make sense? It's actually really important to think about conflicts in logic, because the world isn't black and white, the world isn't binary, and actually we were ruled by a number of different logics, and that's the only way that I know how to describe them. And that the magic happens and being human happens when we recognize that there has to be a negotiation and a conflict between all these logics. And that, for me, is quite an important part of truth, which is the next slide. Truth. Okay, I'm just going to blitz through these slides. I wrote something on what is truth in a democracy a while ago, but this, for me, kind of encapsulates like 2,000 years worth of truth and philosophy, and I can do it in about 5 minutes. So let's go through this. Next slide, please. This is you. Hopefully you recognize yourself. No? Next slide. And this is the truth, this kind of ethereal concept, and the truth is external to you. This is kind of how most people think about truth. The fact that the truth can be discovered, there is only one form of truth, right? Next slide. In order to discover the truth, though, we need to use a method. So classic methods would be, I can see with my eyes, or I can feel things, or I can taste things. Other forms of method, like the scientific method, the philosophical method, they're all kind of like imperfect ways to try and understand that external truth. So next slide. So the truth, kind of, we get this blurry idea of what truth is. So in some cases, it kind of becomes more clear, and in some cases, it's more blurry, but that's how it works. So that's one form of understanding truth. Next slide. This version of truth, though, doesn't get thought about quite so much in the popular discourse. And that's to understand the truth that we have inside ourselves. So I know when I feel hungry, for instance, and that hunger is my truth. I know when I'm in love. I know I can experience things. I know when I'm feeling angry. I know when I have a sense of injustice. And we reach these methods through all sorts of different means. But that in ourselves is something that's really important and should be recognized as truth. Next slide. Okay, so this is you, all with your internal truths in a community, and this kind of is how truth is then constructed. So it's not necessarily truth about things that are external to you, but ways in which you see the world, injustices that you might all face as a community, goals that you might have as a community, values that you might have as a community. And you all stand together and you kind of have this, you see it's more grey than black, this kind of idea of what that community truth is. Next slide. And then you get this. This is now, we're starting to look at democracies. All of these various different groups with various different forms of truth who are kind of in the same landscape. That landscape might be online, that landscape might be a geographical, but yeah, this is what it looks like. It's worth saying as well that I've simplified this so it could just be talking about one issue. So let's say this is views on abortion or something like that. There's many different views on abortion. And if we then switched it and it could be views on marriage, then actually some of these groups would switch. Yeah, there'd be different individuals in different groups. Next slide. Okay, so this is, I would say, the incorrect but most prominent idea of understanding where democratic truth then can lie, is that there are so many people who then believe that out of all of these groups, we can come together and create a big truth. You know, truth is in the middle and there's kind of a negotiation that everyone is fair and everything is equal and we arrive here. Next slide. And then once we've got this truth that everyone is really happy with, we then go out and find that external truth. Yeah? So that's kind of one way of looking at it. That's the way that deliberationists, so deliberative Democrats, think about truth. Next slide. This, on the other hand, is what I think is a more accurate understanding of how truth is constructed in society. It's that one truth becomes much more powerful than all the other kinds of truth. It becomes much bigger. Next slide. And then that group goes out and finds that external truth. Yeah? Why does this all matter? Democracy, I've already said, is an ideal, but we have to have some sort of ideas about how humans actually interact and negotiate with each other in order to create a system that really pushes towards that ideal, as opposed to having everything as being idealistic. So that initial look at deliberationists, where the whole idea is that we all come together and agree on truth, and then go out and find something else, that for me is too idealistic. It's not preferable to have that. Whereas we have to see that this is how society is going to work. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Leclau. Yeah, this is agonism. So, cool. Next slide. Okay. So I've just defined to you the fact that there is conflict in truth, and that democracy is a governance system in which there are representatives, and that there is a constant conflict between liberalism and democracy. So let's now talk about technology. I'm not going to define technology. I mean, I will a bit. Like, generally, we're not talking about the dishwasher here. I kind of like to be able to talk about technologies from, like, 1980 onwards. Anything that's digital. I mean, we could talk about the dishwasher and the wheel and fire and stuff, but they are definitely technologies, but they're not as useful to talk about here. And what I've done is I've kind of created this board where there are many different types of technology, because I think we tend to focus on social media and search engines. Would you agree with that? Kind of, yeah. Cool, okay. So here, VR and AR, biotech, so kind of genetics, and also around how you dye various different technology. I mean, there's so much going on in biotechnology that we really need to start thinking about. AI, financial technology, which in the UK we call fintech. Mapping technologies are crazy powerful, so Google Maps. We have things like City Mapper in London, do you have something similar here? It just tells you how to get somewhere. No? Okay. Wearables, so you've got the standard wearables that, I don't know if anyone here has got an Apple Watch on or something like that, but there's also the wearables that come with health and safety. So there's quite a lot of health and safety apps as well. The smart home, the connected home, autonomous cars, and then finally social media platforms, search engines, and marketing technology, which I feel like we do pay a lot of attention to, and rightly so, but they're not the only actors in this space. Finally, problems related to truth, disinformation, misinformation, and there's also a third one, which is malinformation. So let me get this right. Disinformation is when you purposefully kind of create an untruth and spread it throughout the landscape. Misinformation is something that we've all probably done, which is that we take something that we think is true, but actually isn't true, and then spread it. So I think we're probably all guilty of misinformation to one extent or the other. Malinformation is a really interesting one. It's when you take something that is true, but take it so far out of context that then its interpretation is not at all like you expected it to be. And it's really important to distinguish between these three forms, mis, dis, and mal, because there's different solutions here to each of these problems. Just because we're all guilty. There might be someone who is like a Cassandra and is amazing at always telling what's true and false. I'll believe it when I see it, but I think we're probably all guilty of misinformation. And so we don't want anything that the penalties are too high to deal with misinformation. And indeed, misinformation might be an important part of conflict and truth construction and that kind of thing, because we might not be expressing this is true. We might be expressing this is an idea, and I think quite a lot of people have been talking about this over the last few days, but this is an idea which expresses something that is true to me. And I think we all do that. You know, I'm definitely guilty of saying, you know, something is true when I actually mean someone has made me angry. Yeah. I don't know. Can I swear? Yeah. You can just say something like, yeah, this person's a real bitch or something, whereas the reality is it's just, I don't like her. Hillary Clinton gave birth to an alien. That probably just means I don't like Hillary Clinton. It doesn't necessarily mean Hillary Clinton gave birth to an alien. And what we need to be able to do is distinguish between the emotion behind what people are saying and the factual content. Okay, tribalism. I mean, in some ways, what we just saw there were different tribes, right, on the board. And I think that's an important part of democracy. So it's not necessarily, again, true that tribalism is always wrong, but there are some limits to that, especially when it starts making other people feel unsafe or not being able to be free and that kind of thing. Exclusion, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Oppression, something that definitely in the UK we've been talking about a lot relating to Black Lives Matter. But also the Me Too movement of 2017, and I expect there'll be many more anti-oppression movements in the future. Perception control is such an important part of truth. If you're controlling what you see in the world, then of course you're going to have a different idea of what truth is. And going back to mapping technologies, on Google Maps, I kind of like have all these various different bars and restaurants that should appear to me come up on the Google Map. And sometimes I'm just blind to anything that aren't those things. Do you feel that as well in your physical environment sometimes? Yeah. Ideological hegemony is, again, if you're a fan of MUF, you'll like that word. It's basically this whole idea around what is permissible in your society. So what is the dominant ideology in your society? Scrutiny, which is surveillance, basically. But it's a form of surveillance which is highly, there is an individual behind they've got some sort of agenda that they want, and surveillance can just be all kinds of surveillance. Okay, democratic functions, voter equality. I'm actually not going to go through these in too much detail, but voter equality, human rights, elections, control of the agenda, which is around definition setting and that kind of thing. Autonomy, so just the fact that I am the best possible judge of my own future. Like, if I think that something is good for me, then that buck stops there. That's my autonomy, right? Political understanding, so to what extent do we understand what other people are thinking? Effective participation, freedom and justice. So just some really easy concepts here. So I'm really grateful to the people who have already posted in the box what they think is connected and various different technologies, problems, and democratic functions. But I would love to get some people up here talking about how they feel about it, because I think you've listened to me speak for far too long now, and I'd like to learn from you guys. So how's best to do this? Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to just find out which, pick one technology, the problem, the democratic function, and then elaborate on why those three things are connected. And I am a teacher, by the way, so I'm very good at picking on people. So if no one comes up, and it's going to be you because you laughed. I'm kidding. Then please do come up and give your views. Nika, because you invited me, you're coming up. I think we're having some technical difficulties.
No, it's okay. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't have enough time, I guess, to think about it now. Is there anyone else who knows what to say? Because, like, I just barely read through it.
How about one that is most...
So perhaps, okay, yeah. I would say this one. Search engines, ideological hegemony. And... I don't know. So it's 111, right?
I'd pick political understanding.
Okay.
Why
so
would
now you talk together?
No worries. I'm just helping out. You're the first. So why did you pick search engines and ideological hegemony? Why do you think search engines perpetuate a form of ideological hegemony?
because they enable, not enable, like more of the same becomes the norm of functioning, or like there's like I mean, it's connected to marketing technology as well in a way, but like the one who pays more or the one who knows their CEO better, then their results become a more accepted truth in a way. Like if more people, I mean, because most people, I guess, use Google, the ones who know how to make their way up the ranks then become a more, I guess, more trustworthy agent, I guess.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Absolutely true.
And yeah, that might be an example of me using emotion as opposed to fact. And then why is that a problem for political understanding?
I mean, I would go, I guess, back to what you said about autonomy. That's why I find it very difficult to really know how to separate those things and define in a way. I mean, political understanding in a way that, like, if you are being given a certain answer to a certain question, that's like how we form our understandings. I don't really.
That's literally what the problem is. It's like there is no contest there, so there's no ability to have conflict because the search engine has already defined the truth for us without us being able to be present in that decision at all.
I don't have anything else to say.
You've been wonderful. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause. Being picked on. Yeah, please come up.
Hey, so I don't know exactly how wide the category of financial tech is sort of defined, but let's say I choose financial tech, and by this I mean, for example, technological means which are used to calculate things like credit rating, generally your trustworthiness in relation to financial institutions that, you know, or if we take another example, let's just stop with the credit rating, right? Cool. Okay, so problems related to truth. So obviously with credit ratings, there's definitely a problem of oppression. Yeah. There's definitely a problem with scrutiny, and there's definitely a problem with surveillance. From which there definitely follows indirectly a problem of autonomy, a problem of effective participation, a problem of freedom, and a problem of justice. Why? And here I want to emphasize something which sort of bothered me in your presentation so far. So in the beginning, you posed this sort of like bipolar division between, on the one hand, liberalism, and on the other hand, democracy. But from the way you posed it, it was clear that the liberalism you mean with liberalism is political liberalism. But political liberalism is not everything liberalism is about. There's also economic liberalism, right? Yeah. So there's and the way you phrased it so far, at least, has been in terms of rights and political participation in this tradition of political liberalism that focuses on negative freedom. So the non-interference of the state in your internal affairs. But I like to just focus a little bit on positive freedom on the other hand. So the ability to actually actualize things, the ability to have that sort of decent enough financial autonomy. For example, in Germany right now, flat owners can demand your credit score as a sort of criteria for accepting you or not as a tenant. Yeah. So this is something that obviously reproduces your position in a sort of class structure-based society and so on, and limits your abilities for political participation ultimately when we take into account the whole cluster of other phenomena that come with it.
So from what I've understood of what you've said, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, is that your criticism of this is the fact that I didn't kind of encourage the whole picture around what liberalism is.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, so you're kind of adding a footnote onto the presentation.
That perhaps, just to be more clear, that perhaps there is an even greater antagonism than the one you posed at the beginning. So the one between democracy and political liberalism. Perhaps there is also an antagonism between economic liberalism and political antagonism, and there is also an antagonism between economic liberalism and democracy.
I completely agree with that. It's just when you're given an hour, you just choose the things that you choose to focus on. But generally, when it comes to liberalism in general, like there are many different parts of it, and obviously neoliberalism is a completely different thing. And liberalism in America is very different to the one that I described here. But luckily, we were able to identify that because I defined my terms, I guess. So, but let's kind of move on to, would you say that's a fair response, actually?
No, let's just move on.
Okay, cool. Okay. For now. I look forward to it. FinTech, scrutiny, surveillance, and oppression, freedom, justice, political understanding. I know you said effective participation and autonomy. Yeah, I think we need to talk about FinTech more and its roles in democracy. Absolutely. Like, amazing that you just picked that out because it's a really important, it's a really important part of the puzzle here is thinking about where all these different things are contributing to oppression. It's not just social media platforms. And yeah, I'm really pleased that you picked out freedom and justice as well, and also gave the distinction between negative and positive freedoms. Because, yeah, it's interesting because the Human Rights Act, I'd say, is full of very positive freedoms. It's very much talking about your right to education, your right to fair representation, your right to a home which is free and all this kind of thing. So I think that within that as well, like there is definitely an aspect of positive freedom. I think the question then is that once we've identified that FinTech leads to oppression, which is a problem for freedom, we can then think of like activist projects which then can kind of help us understand that better. So I really loved what Oz was talking. Was anyone else here for Oz's presentation yesterday? 1, 2, 3, yeah. So he was giving some examples of showing and demonstrating exactly where these oppressions lay, and these kind of art exercises of showing how the truth is constructed in FinTech was just a really cool example of how you might be able to fight back against these huge algorithms and these huge machines. So he gave the example of watching the watchers, which I then went to check out. I thought it was really cool. Yeah, great example. Thanks for picking those ones out. Would anyone else like to come up? Yeah, great.
I would say marketing technology, perception, control, and autonomy.
Exactly, yeah, amazing. Any particular marketing technologies that you're thinking of?
I'm thinking about those that trigger the people's brain by a color or, I don't know, sound or something like that, that makes you react automatically to some inputs and not by your choice.
So, so basically that some marketing technologies kind of appeal to the more base instincts inside our heads. Mm-hmm. So we're more likely to look at violence or sex and that kind of thing, as they appeal to that, which changes our perception of the world, which then, is that kind of a fair interpretation of what you said, or are you getting at something else?
Or yes, this is one of the examples. Another example is like you have some, I don't know, some really bright colors with letters, with a lot of sounds, things that make stimulate to your brain that it's interesting, and it's not interesting because you like that product, but because it makes some...
Yeah, I think what you might be getting at is James Williams has this idea of seduction. So when we're seduced into seeing the same thing, and that is a big problem for our freedom, because I've kind of given this example a lot. I've bought a lot of beauty products in lockdown because I don't know if any other women kind of are having this problem right now, but I just constantly get advertised beauty products, and it's just made me think that maybe the solution to lockdown is a better facial moisturizer. And that's definitely not like a choice that I made. I was very much seduced into that. I can tell you a long list of products that don't work now. But yeah, seduction is a really important part. And that also kind of gets back to the economic liberal side of things, like this kind of push into capitalism, into consumerism, and that kind of thing. Let's have one more, and then we'll wrap this up. Yes, my friend.
Okay, I'm okay. I would pick social media platforms. Can I pick three, actually? Disinformation, misinformation, and you mentioned before, what was it, the third one? Malinformation.
Malinformation, sorry.
And political understanding.
Yeah, this is the big one.
Like if I can put things more concrete,
please.
I would say internet radicalization, political radicalization by these three criteria on social media platforms. Just like young, impressionable people, very prone to just like, you need something to cling on in life, and just like that. Everything.
So it's really cool that you picked this one, because I think this is the one that is articulated the most. I'm not going to speak for Slovenian media. I don't really know. I can't speak Slovenian. But definitely in the UK and the US, then this is the one that is talked about the most. What my question then to you is given that we know that truth is kind of constructed and that different people have different mechanisms for expressing their own truth, to what extent can we think about designing social media platforms to allow for a contested form of truth? Do you see what I'm getting at? Because this is then the next step.
Yeah.
This is the next part of it.
Like, fuck, it's really complicated. Like, I think you will be able to say it better.
That's very kind.
Yeah, but just like in a way, you have on social media platform, you have battle between ideas, especially like it's a broad generalization, but I would say like left and right, and just like the whole value system.
I'm gonna I speak English as my first language, and you guys are already doing amazingly well. So I think that's the next step. So what I've tried to demonstrate to you in this kind of pseudo workshop is a methodology for approaching these problems, and a methodology for thinking about technology, truth, and democracy in your own activism. So you can see how you can put various different words on each of these three sections, and then think about exactly how you create an activist project which then doesn't kind of make another problem with democracy, that doesn't reduce freedom in some way and all this kind of thing. So that's been the purpose of what I've been trying to do with you guys today, is just show you this particular method. And hopefully you've got something out of that. I don't know if any of you have used this kind of method before. No? I really wish that more people, especially more people who are getting funding for civil society projects, would think more in these kind of terms, rather than just think through like a common sense solution, which tends to have been done by someone else before, but just really thinking through exactly what it is that we're trying to solve and what we're not trying to solve. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. And thank you so much for everyone's inputs. I really appreciate it. I usually do workshops rather than talks. You can probably tell. I don't really like the sound of my voice all that much. I don't know if anyone does. So I published, it's not really a report or a paper. I was trying to publish a book for ages on my activism around polarization, and no one wanted to hear from me. So I then just published my book proposal, which can be found here, echochamber.club/reports. It's fairly readable. I like to think it's full of philosophy. It's full of these little diagrams that you've also just seen. And here are some main takeaways that I think that we should be thinking about when thinking about truth and democracy. The one that I keep pushing is that I think that currently we're having a crisis of meaning. And I don't want to say this is true for Slovenia, but definitely in the UK, when quite often I'm debating things with other people, we actually agree most of the time, but we just have completely different definitions for things. And so what we need is more translative technologies between what are various different groups' ideas around feminism, for instance. Like, generally, most people would agree with the principles of feminism, but they just don't like the word feminism. Climate change is another example. So I would love to see some more translation so that we can understand those dual aspects of meaning. And I think that at the moment we have a crisis of meaning. The second is understanding that there is a human before the message. We all have our ways of communicating. I definitely don't always speak in truths. I'm much better at trying to make people laugh in general. And so I kind of sacrifice truth for comedy sometimes. And just understanding that I am a human behind that message and giving me the time of day is really important. But currently, the internet is kind of set up around this whole idea that we can reach a shared truth. You know, that slide around deliberation and just that we as communities can create a shared truth. So they put the message before the human rather than the human before the message. Is this making sense? Kind of. I'd love to see some more activism around that. I would also love to see some more maps of how different definitions and agendas change through time on particular topics. You can do it yourself, but it would be great to have some more research in this kind of field. One example I can think of, for example, was we in the UK are having a couple of problems with ISIS in general, kind of, and various different bombings and that kind of thing. And there was a particular kid, she was 16, she actually lives very close to me, called Shamima Begum, who went out to become a jihadi bride. And when then she was found about 3 or 4 years later, and she'd have a horrific existence. And instead of it was really interesting because within 3 hours of discovering Shamima Begum, suddenly the whole conversation was around whether or not she should have citizenship. And then, for me, it was completely irrelevant, this question of citizenship. I don't understand why that was on the agenda in the first place. But if then suddenly no one could talk about Shamima Begum for a week afterwards unless they mentioned whether or not she should or should not have British citizenship, I can think of many other things that should have been on that agenda. So if we were able to map that and map various different actors who are in place there, that could also be quite a cool exposure project. And yeah, any other projects around highlighting the construction of truth in tech would be really cool to see. And so, yeah, that's kind of some of the ideas that I have. Next slide. Come and have a go at me here. This is my Twitter. These are my various email addresses. If you'd like to check out the Tech Campus Community and Consultancy, hatusia.com and the echochamber.club, we're now hosting completely virtual meetups, which are amazing because we have people from all over the world who are attending. And I think that's going to continue. Between me and you, I was like, you can't do philosophy online. How ridiculous. And now I absolutely love talking about philosophy with someone in Liverpool, Dublin, New York, Berlin, Madrid, all these places. It's really cool. So please do come along if you're interested. And yeah, thank you so much for your thoughts. And I hope that this has in some way inspired you. And yeah, come and grab me afterwards if you'd like to have a chat.